Welcome to Read Along and Out Loud with Grit, and today I'll be reading Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Chapter 1. I accidentally vaporized my pre-Albert teacher. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now, believe whatever lie your mom and dad told you about your birth, and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary, and most of the time it gets you killed in the most painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid and you're reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, and if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I am 12 years old. Only a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you can say that. I could really prove my point. I could really start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it. But things started going really bad last May when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids, 2 teachers on a yellow bus, heading to the Museum of Art to look at Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair, scruffy beard, and a tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told you jokes and stories and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher in the entire school who didn't put me to sleep. I hoped this trip would be okay. At least I hope for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like on my 5th grade school, when we went to one of the battlefields. I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon, and I wasn't aiming for the school bus. But of course I got expelled anyways. And before that, at my 4th grade school, we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Merlin World shark pool. I sort of hit the wrong lever in the catwalk, and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckly red-haired maniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwiches. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades, because he was the only 6th grader with an acne and a start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some sort of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny. Like every step hurt him, but don't let that fool you. You should see him run when it was Angela Day in the cafeteria. Anyways, Nancy Bobofit was throwing wads of sandwiches that stuck into his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster already had threatened me with death by in school suspension if anything bad happened, embarrassing or mildly entertaining to happen on the trip. I'm going to kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay, I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who will get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I decked Nancy Bobo fit right there and then. In school suspension probably would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up in his front wheelchair, guiding us through the big, echoey galleries, past the marble statues and the glass cases full of really black and orange pottery. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000 years and 3,000 years. He had us gathered around a 13-foot-tall stone column with a big sphinx on top. He started telling us about how it was a grave marker, a stela for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say, but it was kind of interesting. But everybody around me was talking. And every time I told him to shut up, the other teacher chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket. Even though she was 50 years old, she looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She had come to Yancey halfway through the year when our math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From the first day, Mrs. Dodds loved Nancy Beaufort and figured I was the devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and said, "Now, honey, real sweet." I knew I was going to get an after-school detention for a month. One time she made me erase the answers out of old workbooks until midnight. I told Grover I didn't think Mrs. Dodds was human. He looked at me real seriously and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about the Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Beaufort snickered about something about a naked guy on a stela. I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped the story. "Mr. Jackson, do you have a comment?" My face went totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the seal. "Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents?" I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. That's Kronos eating his kids, right? "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. "And I know it's because..." Well, I racked my brain to remember. Kronos was the king god and... God? Mr. Brunner asked. "Titan," I corrected myself. "And he didn't trust his kids who were gods, so Kronos ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. Later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad, Kronos, into barfing up his brothers and sisters." "Ew," said one of the girls behind me. So there was a big fight between the gods and the Titans, and it continued, and the gods won. Some of the snickers behind the group. Behind me, Nancy Beaufort mumbled to her friend, like we're actually going to use this in real life. Like it's going to say it on our job applications. "Please explain why Kronos ate his kids." "And why, Mr. Jackson," Brunner said, to paraphrase Miss Beaufort's excellent question, "does this matter in real life?" "Busted," Grover mustered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter and red in her hair. At least Nancy got packed too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about his question and shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "I see." Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. "Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a miniature of mustard and wine, which made a disorder in his stomach, and his other 5 children, who of course were being immortal gods, had been living and growing up in his stomach. The The gods defeated their father, sliced him to pieces with his own scythe, scattered his remains in Tantars, the darkest parts of the underworld. On the happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dodds, would you lead us back outside? The class drifted off, girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around, acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow him when Mr. Brunner said, "Mr. Jackson." I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going, then I turned towards Mr. Brunner. "Sir?" Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go. His intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000-year old, and had seen everything. You must learn the answer to my question. Mr. Brunner told me about the Titans, about real life, how your studies will apply to it. What you learn from me is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will accept only the best from you, Mr. Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, he was kind of cool in tournament days when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, "What ho!" and challenged us. Sword point against chalk. Run to the board, and every Greek and Roman person who ever lived, and their mother, what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everyone else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention to my disorder, and I never had made above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to do as good. He expected me to do better. I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, and much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder, while Mr. Brunner took one look and sat still, like he'd been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go way outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum where we could watch the foot of traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I've ever seen over the city. I figured it was global warming or something because the weather across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We had massive snowstorms, flooding, and wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane coming blown in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelleting pigeons with Lunchable crackers. Nancy Bobofet was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's lady's purse. And of course, Mrs. Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of a fountain away from the others. We thought that if we did that, everybody who wouldn't know that we were in that school, the school for loser freaks who couldn't make it anywhere else. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, not from Brunner. I just wish he'd lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then I thought he was going to give me some deep talk and comment how to make me feel better. And he said, "Can I have your apple?" I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs go down Fifth Avenue and thought my mom's apartment only a little ways uptown where he sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me, glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed too. She sent me right back to Yancy and reminded me that I had to try harder. Even if this was my 6th year, in 6 years, I was probably going to get kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand that sad look she'd give me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicap ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Bobofet appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she got tired of stealing from the tourists. She dumped half of her eating lunch in Grover's lap. Oops, she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if somebody sprayed her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. School counselor had told me 1,000,000 times, count to 10, get control of your temper. I was so mad and my mind went blank. A wave roared over my ears. I don't remember touching her, but the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain screaming, "Nancy, Percy pushed me." Mrs. Dots materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see? The water, grabbed her." I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew that I was in trouble again as soon as Mrs. Dots was sure that poor little Nancy was okay, promising her to get a new shirt at the museum gift shop, etc., etc. Mrs. Dots turned on me. There was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I'd done something she'd been waiting all semester. "Now, honey, I know," I grumbled. "A month erasing workbooks. Come with me." Mrs. Dots said, "Wait," Grover yelped. It was me. I pushed her. I stared at him stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover me. Mrs. Dots scared Grover to death. She glared him down so hard that his whiskery chin trembled. "I don't think so, Mr. Underwood. But you will stay here." Grover looked at me desperately. "It's okay, man," I told him. "Thanks for trying." "Honey," Mrs. Dots barked at me. "Now." Nancy Boba Fett smirked, and I gave her my Dulux "I'll kill you later" stare. Then I turned to face Mrs. Dots, but she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, way at the top of the steps, gesturing impatiently to come on. How'd she get there so fast? I have moments like that a lot, when my brain falls asleep or something. Next thing I know, I've missed something, as if a puzzle piece fell out of the universe and left me staring at a blank piece behind it. The school counselor told me that this was part of ADHD, and my brain was sort of misinterpreting things. I wasn't sure. I went after Mrs. Dots. Halfway up the stairs, I glanced back at Grover. He was looking pale, cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner, like he wanted Mr. Brunner to notice what was going on, but Mr. Brunner was absorbed in his novel. I looked back up. Mrs. Dots had disappeared again. Now she was inside of the building at the front of the entrance hall. Okay, I thought, she's gonna make me buy a new shirt for Nancy at the gift shop. Apparently that wasn't her plan. I followed her deeper into the museum. When I finally caught up to her, we were in the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Mrs. Dots stood with her arms crossed in front of a big marble frenzy of the Greek gods. She was making this weird noise in her throat, like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It's weird without being alone with the teacher, especially Mrs. Dots. Something the way she looked at the frisbee, as if she wanted to pulverize it. "You've been giving us problems, honey," she said. "I did the safe thing," I said. "Yes, ma'am." She tugged the cuffs on the cuffs of her leather jacket. "Did you really think you would get away with it?" The look in her eyes was beyond mad. It was evil. "She's a teacher," I thought nervously. "It's not like she's gonna hurt me." I'll try harder, ma'am," I said. Thunder shook the building. "We are not fools, Percy Jackson. It's only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess and you will suffer less pain." I don't know what she was talking about. All I could think of was that teachers must have found the illegal stash of candy I've been selling out of my dorm room. Maybe they realized I got my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet without even reading the book, and now we're gonna make me take away my grade. Or worse, they're gonna make me read the book. "Well," she demanded. "Ma'am, your time is up," she hissed. Weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turned into talons. Her jacket melted into large leathery wings. She wasn't human. a shriveled bag with bat wings, claws, and a mouth full of yellow fangs. She was about to slice me to ribbons. Then things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner, who had been out in front of the museum a minute ago, wheeled his chair in the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. "What ho, Percy!" he shouted. Tossed the pen through the air. Mrs. Dots lunged at me. With a yelp, I dodged and felt the talon slash the air next to my ear. I snatched the ballpoint end out of nowhere, but when it hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Brunner's bronze sword, which he always used on tournament day. Mrs. Dots spun around towards me with a murderous look in her eyes. My knees were jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the sword. She snarled, "Die, honey." She flew at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. The only thing I did that came naturally, I swung the sword. The metal blade hit her in the shoulder and passed clean through her body as if she was made of water. Mrs. Dots was a sandcastle in the power fan. She exploded into yellow powder and vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur and dying screech as a chill of evil was in the air, as if those two glowing eyes were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand. Mr. Brunner wasn't there. Nobody was there but me. My hands were still trembling. My lunch must have been contained some magic mushrooms or something. Had I imagined the whole thing? I went back outside. It started to rain. Grover was sitting by the fountain. A museum map tinted over there. Nancy Bobofit was still standing there, soaked up from a swim in the fountain, grumbling to herself. Their ugly friends, when she saw me, she said, "I hope Mrs. Kerr whipped your butt." I said, "Who? Our teacher." Duh. I blinked. We had no teacher named Mrs. Kerr. I asked what Nancy she was talking about. She rolled her eyes and turned away. I asked Grover where Mrs. Dots was. He said, "Who?" He paused first, but then wouldn't look at me. So I thought he was missing to me. Not funny, man. This is serious. Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella, reading his book, as if nothing ever moved. I went over to him. He looked up, a little distracted. "Ah, that'd be my pen. Please bring your own writing utensil in the future, Mr. Jackson." I handed Mr. Brunner his pen. I hadn't even realized I was still holding it. "Sir, where's Mrs. Dots?" I said. He stared at me blankly. "Who?" "The other chaperone, Mrs. Dots, the pre-algebra teacher." He frowned and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. "Percy, there is no Mrs. Dots on this trip. As far as I know, there's never been a Mrs. Dots at Yancey Academy. Are you feeling all right?" And that's the end of the chapter.